Hey, what's up, y'all? If you've seen one of my videos before, welcome back. If you haven't, welcome for the first time. My name's Raj. I'm the owner and doctor of physical therapy at 3CB Performance in LA. Today's topic is Lonzo Ball's grade 1 MCL sprain. I'll be going over what the MCL is, what its function is and its structure, how that relates to basketball movements, how that relates to Lonzo specifically, and what that means for his rehab, his timeline, and going forward. So if you like the content, feel free to subscribe or leave comments or questions below. The team hasn't released that much information as to how he got hurt or why he got hurt or what movement specifically caused the injury. So we're coming up on almost 3 weeks here. And we know it's a grade 1 MCL sprain. A grade 1 essentially means that there's a tear of 0 to 25%. Don't let that word tear fool you. Any sprain involves a tear, okay, of your fibers. And so the first aspect to understanding the MCL is the structure. So check this picture out. So as you'll see in the picture, the MCL goes from your femur down to your tibia and inserts on your tibia and also feeds into your meniscus as well. The cool thing about anatomy is that structure belies function. The function of the MCL, there's 5 key things that it does, okay? The first thing that it does is that it resists valgus force. So check out this picture. You'll see how as that knee gets driven inward, the MCL gets tensioned, provides that stability. Secondly, it provides rotational stability. Thirdly, it prevents hyperextension. Fourthly, it provides joint proprioception. So proprioception is essentially, it's a sensory feedback loop where there's data being provided to your brain so the brain can make small adjustments, and also it can activate certain muscles to help provide an active constraint. And ligaments, which is MCL is one of those, they're part of the sensory feedback loop. They provide angular and velocity data to your brain to help with that loop. So when a ligament gets stretched out, it actually loses some of that ability and it inhibits that joint proprioception. And the last aspect of the MCL is that it takes load off your ACL. It helps dissipate some of the forces that the ACL is responsible for as well. All right, so how does the MCL specifically relate to basketball? The first part is the valgus force. The valgus force essentially is that lateral movement. So you think about basketball, right? How often are you doing lateral movement? Pretty dang often, whether you're moving defensively or offensively, a jab step, or you're trying to explode laterally, right? It's full of lateral movements. Secondly, when it comes to valgus force, when you're running, every time that lead foot lands on the ground, there's a valgus force. And that happens 2 ways. It's due to the kinetic chain. One, at your foot. Your foot will pronate to absorb load, and your towel curl joint, your ankle joint, drops in. Your tibia is connected to it, so it internally rotates. That means your femur also internally rotates. That results in that knee dropping inward. And then secondly, that when that ground reaction force comes up your leg into your pelvis tilts upward and it creates adduction at your leg, at your thigh. Again, that results in that valgus force. Check this picture out. You'll see the first picture is kind of the anatomy of it, and secondly, what it looks like in real life. So the running aspect, the force absorption aspect creates that valgus force. Now, when it comes to landing, it's the same mechanical principle as running. As your foot hits the ground, it's absorbing the load, creates a valgus force. The thing about landing is that there's a significantly higher force because you're dropping from a certain height. research shows that even dropping from 60 centimeters, which is about 2 feet, results in a ground reaction force of almost 6.5 times your body weight. There's also other factors when it comes to landing that can affect the force levels. A few of those include your landing strategy, meaning is it 1 foot versus 2 feet? Your foot placement, are you landing on your forefoot or midfoot versus your heel? And lastly, your knee angle. Do you have a soft knee or do you have a stiff knee? And so those all affect how you're able to absorb force. And the last aspect is with the valgus movement is jumping. So again, in the loading phase of jumping, when you go down, trying to bend your knees, it creates that valgus force. Check this picture out right here to really see an example of really high level of valgus collapse. So that picture is RG3 at his combine, and you'll see, it's pretty nasty looking. And so these are all movements within basketball that create a valgus force. Second aspect of the MCL within basketball is rotation. Now, any combined movement in basketball, so many of them involve rotation, right? Whether you're guarding pick and roll, you got to navigate pick and roll. Whether defensively, you have to tag a cutter and then get back to your man. Whether you're turning and going in transition, turning for a rebound. There's so much rotation, so the MCL is always providing stability. Thirdly is the aspect of preventing hyperextension, and a lot of that comes during deceleration phases, starting and stopping. Again, which happens all the time in basketball, right? You're chasing a rebound toward the sideline, you got to stop real quick. You have to recover to your man, close out, and then guard against the drive. Starting, stopping, deceleration. Again, the MCL is critical in that. And then lastly, kind of overlying all this, is the fact that when it comes to a sport with this many variables, multiplanar, you're going to have unanticipated movements that aren't ideal. So you need that MCL to be as strong and healthy as possible, because you might not be able to land the way you want to land. You have to multitask while you're doing things. So you want your MCL and bodily structures to be as strong as possible. All right, so moving on to the next part. How does the MCL specifically relate to Zoe's role, right? So the first thing is he's a perimeter-oriented role. Defensively, he's involved at the point of attack. He's navigating a lot of pick and roll. And he's also getting hit by screens as well. So he has those rotary start-stop valgus aspects are very pertinent for him defensively. And offensively as well, he's often the primary ball handler. So he's attacking on pick and roll, lateral explode, attacking the big. He has to start and stop to read a defensive coverage or find a shooting window as well, whether to reroute or double back for another screen. Again, multiple movements. If he's in the paint, navigate the paint, has to stop there, rotate there as well. And then secondly for him is the fact that throughout his career, his life, he's been a high-paced player. He runs a lot. He's super active, always in transition. What does that mean? That means a lot more running reps for him at a high speed. So he's starting and stopping, and then he's running a lot. So again, that constant valgus force for him. The third aspect for Zoe specifically, he's a high rebound rate, and he loves to shot block. What does that mean? It means, one, that he's jumping more often, which means more load. Secondly, he's often jumping in crowded spaces, right? Which is going to increase the variability of his landing. Because when you're in a crowded space, sometimes you can't anticipate what's going to happen. Like I said, unanticipated situations that you have to be able to prepare for through your training, through your rehab. And the fourth aspect, something that's really unique to Lonzo, and that makes him kind of special, is the fact when he multitasks while rebounding. So he'll go up, grab that board, he'll look ahead, take that mental picture. So right when he comes down, he'll make that instant hit ahead pass, right? But what does that mean? As he's looking somewhere else, that means he now has to rely more on his sensory feedback as he's landing. So that's something definitely to keep an eye on when it comes to the rehab and training as well. Fifth aspect, the kid has bounce. He has a pretty solid vertical. You'll see it when he goes up for boards, but the most evident aspect is when he really wants to go up, and put a dunk in, he'll go up pretty high. A few things that do help mitigate some of that force for him. He's primarily a two foot jumper, and he's also pretty light. Both those things help. Sixth aspect, Lakers defensive scheme. A lot of switching. So he's often matched up with bigs, which means he's in a high leverage spot. He's absorbing more load, whether it's on the block or it's boxing out, which again puts more rotary extension, valgus load on his MCL. And the last aspect, I wasn't sure to include this, but just some food for thought. His jumper, if you used a force plate, I bet the way that he loads on his left side and comes across, it's probably a little bit of weight transfer to his left. It's pretty marginal, but just stuff I was thinking about, so I thought I'd throw it out there. All right, so what does all mean for the last aspect, rehab, his timeline, and onwards? So for Lonzo's rehab, the way I break down anyone's rehab, including Lonzo's, is using a model that I created. It's from my social welfare days at Berkeley. It's called the micro, meso, macro, or 3 circles. That's actually what the 3C and 3CB stands for. So in Lonzo's case, the micro aspect is what I call the tissue level. So with Lonzo, that's going to be healing the ligament itself, letting those fibers regrow, and also then dealing with some of the inflammation in the surrounding area. Usually in this case, a lot of it will be in the quadriceps area as well, so dealing with that. Now, the meso level refers to more systemic issues, looking at biomechanics, the nervous system. There's plenty of other systems like that. If you want to learn more about them, ask questions in the comments. I'll be focusing on the 2 major ones. First is biomechanically, looking at does he have certain muscles that are fatigued or weakened that are changing some of his mechanics? So addressing that if you do see those deficits. And secondly is the nervous system. So the first aspect of that is what I call neuromuscular, looking at are the muscles firing in the appropriate sequence? Because the reality is you can have muscles that are incredibly strong, but if they're not firing in the right way, it doesn't even matter. So for example, we'll see in a lot of individuals, I don't know if it's true in Lonzo's case or not, is that people with low back or hamstring pain, is that their glutes aren't firing. So you have to reteach some of that muscle sequencing. The other aspect of the nervous system is neuromotor control. The easiest way to think about that is kind of your gross overall motor pattern. So running, jumping, landing. In Lonzo's case, is analyzing his running, his gait, his jumping, and his landing mechanics. And then if you see some issues with that, is then reteaching some of those mechanics. And a key thing here to understand with those mechanics, that there's no right or wrong. Every person has different variants. We all have asymmetry and variance when it comes to our motor patterns. It's looking at things that may be increasing the risk, or that may be looking at maybe leading to increased risk for his MCL, like a valgus knee pattern or other aspects like that. The third aspect of the nervous system is looking at what I call sensory motor control. That's feedback systems in your body that are telling your brain where you are in space. The first one is your proprioceptive system. That's your unconscious awareness of where you are in space. So for example, if you don't look at your hand and you move it around, that's what tells you where your hand is in space. The other aspect is your vestibular system. That's a combination of your vision, your inner ear, which is filled with fluid, and then your auditory as well. It's the main input that helps with balance and also with head movements as well. So for both these aspects, again, within Lonzo's case, looking at does he have deficits in these areas and then training them. I had mentioned before about how the MCL is a key structure in your proprioception. So maybe with him, you want to retrain some of those proprioceptive aspects in his rehab and incorporate that into his rehab as well. And then additionally, I talked about how at Lonzo, he's often multitasking, as a lot of players are when it comes to professional sports. So your vestibular system has to really be tuned in order to help you and your body during movements. The last aspect of the nervous system is looking at what I call neurocognitive pain. And what that means is that when we have pain with certain movements, your brain becomes conditioned to anticipate pain in those movements. So when it comes to rehab, is that at the start, you don't want to push through pain. So in Lonzo's case, he's probably going to have a lot of pain with lateral movements, combined rotation movements. So you want to start off with movements that are comfortable for him and then gradually give him greater exposure and increase to those movements that were then causing him pain. And this is something that Marco Nunez in general, who's a Lakers head trainer, he took over after Gary Vee retired. He's done a hell of a job, in my opinion. He's really, really good at graded incremental increases. And this is something we've seen in general with the Lakers from Lonzo, as we've heard about in the last handful of days, that Lonzo went from kind of just, doing movement in a forward plane to then doing lateral, and then he started doing drills with Miles Simon, and then he moved on to non-contact actual practice, and now he started participating in contact practice. So he's taking these steps and he's meeting those metrics that you want when it comes to the pain aspect, and that's huge in general for reducing pain. So now we have the last kind of overlying factor, which are the macro factors. Now, when in Lonzo's case, you have the reality that he's a rookie in the NBA. In college, he only played, I think it was something like 36 games, averaged 35 minutes. In the NBA, you're playing 82 games. He's been averaging about 34 minutes. If you calculated that out, that's over a 200% increase on sheer minutes alone. Then you add in, all the media stuff, all those other responsibilities. He's basically being overloaded physically and mentally, and all rookies are. We saw the same thing with Kuzma, who started having some of these quad issues, muscular issues, and BI's had some of those issues as well in years 1 and 2, and naturally so. It's a huge increase to your body, to your mind. Secondly, the reality is, even though the Lakers are now, right on the brink of contending for that 8th spot, especially with Isaiah coming in and possibly propelling them, into contention, the reality is the Lakers aren't playing for all that much. So the risk-reward ratio of bringing Lonzo back too soon completely tilts toward risk. So that's why it makes sense to be conservative with his timeline. And then the reality is, if he comes back for that Dallas game on February 23rd, that'll be about 6 weeks. Extremely conservative timeline, but also, again, makes sense considering what Lonzo means to the franchise, where the franchise currently is, and where they want to go. The last aspect I want to talk about is Lonzo's long-term prognosis. I'm not really worried about the MCL, very established protocol. The one thing we don't know is the mechanism as to how he got hurt. Was it impact or not impact? That makes a big difference, because if it's an impact injury, the reality is if you get hit a certain way, if your knee gets hit a certain way, that ligament can't take that much force. It's like, when you come down on someone's foot with your ankle, nothing you can really do about that. However, if it's a non-impact injury, that speaks to some underlying deficit, and that's a lot more, in my opinion, convoluted to get to the source of that issue and actually address it, and it might speak to future injuries as well. But again, that's just me. That's just something to think about going forward, and I have no idea whether he got impact or non-impact. All right, so that about does it for the Lonzo Ball MCL video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave questions below. And as always, if you like the content, feel free to subscribe. And thanks for watching.